morning and welcome to Baha'is Today. My name is Nadia Etemad and I am your host. Today our guest will be Homa Tavangar, who's a global education advisor and author, and she will be discussing how to raise children globally. Homa, welcome.
Thank you, Nadia. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. Could you tell us a little bit about what raising children globally means to you in your work?
Sure. So we talk about raising children sort of globally, but it's really local and global. So it's raising children to have a global perspective or a global outlook, which is something I talked about in Growing Up Global. And the idea in that is that wherever we live, whether you're in Wayne or Berwyn or Philly or Nairobi, Kenya, we live in a time where the world is around us. There are diverse people, there are opportunities, technology, it links us. And so this is an idea that I had been working in international economic development. I'd been working with adults on helping them understand the world. And what I realized, especially it was after 9/11 that it clicked for me, was that we really needed to go younger, start younger, work with our kids, because grown-ups were having a hard time understanding their connection to the wider world, and that our kids in their education and our role at home as parents needed to take a closer, harder look at the relationships we were building with the world, because we're raising our kids during a time of globalization. So it's not just raising your kids globally, but it's raising them wherever they are to not be afraid of the world, to have a global perspective. And so it ties into my being a Baha'i, because I had the benefit growing up of an idea. In the Baha'i writings, it says, let your vision be world-embracing rather than confined to your own self. And so I thought a lot about, what does it take for somebody, even if you've never had a passport, even if you've never got on an airplane, to still have a vision that is world-embracing. And so that's what I try to explore in my work, both with educators and with parents, how, regardless of their ability to travel the world, you can raise your child to have a love of the world and not a fear of the world.
So I'm just wondering, what was it about 9/11 that was so significant that made you think, wow, we need to go younger in global education?
So so at the time I had 2 children, now I have 3, and I was working as an advisor to American companies, and I actually had a specific experience. I was a consultant to the city of Philadelphia, and I helped them go on their first trade mission to China, and we happened to be meeting our group from Philly with the head of the Chinese Olympic Committee. We were looking ahead to 2008, and we were in 2002 on the first anniversary of 9/11, so it was 9/11/02. We were meeting with the head of the Chinese Olympic Committee for 2008.
Wow.
And leading up to that day, I was worried about being in China on 9/11/02. I was worried about not being with my family, and a lot of times I ask people, like, we all remember 9/11/01, but do you also remember the first anniversary, 9/11/02? And a lot of people do, because it was a day that we were nervous, we were worried what's going to happen to the world, we were reliving that horrible day. And then this crazy thing happened in China, in Beijing, where it was like nothing really happened. Like, it wasn't a big deal. And it wasn't that they didn't care about it, but it wasn't central to their radar, on their radar. And so I started thinking, like, what is it about these different perspectives on the same issue why are they not freaking out as we were freaking out? And what are they thinking about? And so I talked to a lot of families in China, and they were really seeing their children's education and success tied to their nation. And I came back. At the time, I lived in TE in Berlin, and I asked parents, like on the sidelines of my kids' soccer games, like, do you think about our kids in relation to what's happening in the world? And I got a lot of like kind of confused looks from people, like, what are you talking about? But I was really interested in this connection between what our kids were learning and what was happening in the wider world. And what I found were books like How to Talk to Your Child About Terrorism.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I didn't want to talk to my kids about terrorism. In fact, there's a Baha'i quote that says, "Love never dwelleth in a heart possessed by fear." So I didn't want their hearts to be possessed by fear. I want them filled with love.
Makes sense.
And so I looked around for resources, and I wasn't a writer. I had no business writing. I mean, I could write a memo. I could write, stuff for work. And I basically set out to write the book I wanted to buy. And so that's how Growing Up Global came about, is I wanted to raise my children to be at home in the world and not fear the world, in spite of all these messages of fear that the news was giving us after 9/11. And there was a moment after 9/11 that the world came together, but then quickly after, 2 wars started. And we're still in that place in the world. So I still think it's very necessary to gain this perspective for ourselves and our children that helps us figure out how to be global problem solvers, how to be responsible global citizens. And so actually, global citizen is a loaded word. A lot of people will say to me, well, I'm an American citizen. I don't want to be a global citizen. Or don't talk to me about being a global citizen. I'm an American citizen. And I'm like, yes, so am I. And the point is not that you have to choose between being an American citizen or a global citizen, a local problem solver or a global problem solver. And so in my work, I try to show, and this is a very Baha'i idea, this idea of oneness, that we are connected to our local environment just as we are connected to the wider world. And as I was looking for how to talk about global citizenship with my friends and neighbors here in the Philly suburbs, I realized that if global citizenship came up as a program on television, I think most of my friends and neighbors would change the channel. Like, I don't think they'd be interested for the most part. But what they would be interested in, like what every parent cares about and every person cares about, is friendship. That everybody wants their kids to have friends, they want to have friends, they want to be a friend. And so I found another quote as I was exploring and really on this like quest to figure out how to talk about being a global citizen with people who may not care about the topic. And I found a quote from the Baha'i writings that says, "Be a friend to the whole human race."
Beautiful.
Be a friend to the whole human race. So it was like a light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, that is it. That's what it means to be a citizen of the world. A global citizen is just a friend to the whole human race. And so now I have the benefit of, I get to travel around the world. I work with schools and educators and organizations all over the world on global citizenship. And I ask every audience, what does it mean to you to be a good friend? I don't ask them about what does it mean to be I do sometimes ask them about what it means to be a global citizen, but I start off by asking, what do you think of when you think of a good friend? And I've been in China, I've been in Dubai, I've been in Texas, I've been in all over, and I ask every audience, what do you think of when you think of a good friend? And it's remarkable how universal the answer is. So every age, every professional background, every financial ability, every level of education, culture, religion, answers this question on friendship in exactly the same way. And they even give me the answers pretty much in the same order. So they always say, to be a good friend, someone is loyal, they're a good listener, they're kind, they're respectful, they're understanding, they're non-judgmental, they got your back when you need it. And then eventually they'll say, we laugh and we have fun together. And so really these qualities of being non-judgmental and being helpful and respectful and a good listener, noticing what's happening around you in your immediate environment and in the wider world, is exactly what it means to be a global citizen. And it's also fun. So as much as we might be worried about crises and war and terrible things that are happening around the world, which there are so many that it feels overwhelming, it's also just like being a friend can be fun and full of laughter and joy. That's the quality of global citizenship that I don't want to lose. I want people to be able to raise their children, to be at home in the world, and feel like I can find the beauty and the joy in the world and not just the sadness and catastrophe. And so if we raise our children to be a friend to the whole human race, it kind of opens up this wonder in our world. And so that's been a really, I had the benefit of growing up as a Baha'i. My parents are both Baha'is, and our family heritage is Jewish and Muslim and Christian. Like, we come from all over before finding the Baha'i faith. And I have to say that's been a really great, like a really beautiful benefit to my own upbringing, being raised around people of very diverse backgrounds and races, and growing up with the idea of really working hard to like end racial prejudice, for example, and having friends of different races in our home all the time, and different faith backgrounds all the time around us. And so being a friend to the whole human race is just how we grew up. And so what I'm finding is I work with groups that are Jewish and Muslim and Mormon and Catholic. I work with a lot of Catholic schools, for example, and they're adopting this idea of being a friend to the whole human race, because that's as Catholic as it is Baha'i. And so there's really those boundaries, like we create those boundaries. And just like being a friend, like I can have friends of many different faiths, races, cultures, beliefs, lifestyles, ability, and that's really what it means to be a global citizen. So it isn't so mystifying and difficult.
When you put it in terms of being a global friend, it's probably much more accessible to people.
Exactly, and that's the idea. This should be an idea that is accessible and not just kind of this elite, far away, like globalization. It seems scary, or it seems like certain people benefit from globalization and other people don't.
Right.
But I think that's because they're not approaching it as a friend to the whole human race. So if your CEO of your global company sees her role as a friend to the whole human race, that can really change a lot. And so we're seeing this when you start with students from a young age. They develop habits and dispositions of global citizenship, and it really can make a big impact.
Can you talk to me about any boundaries or obstacles that you foresee today in creating a global network of citizens and raising our children globally?
Obstacles, sure. I mean, racism and prejudice and greed. These are obstacles, but they're ancient obstacles. So that's where it's really interesting. We find that there's been a lot of data that's been like research organizations like Pew and Brookings and Gallup. They do these surveys and they find that when people, if a person has one acquaintance with a person who's different from themselves. So if you had a friend or a neighbor that you knew who wore a hijab, for example, who practiced Islam, and you knew her, knowing one person from a group different from yourself changes your opinion of the entire population.
Wow.
So a barrier,
Positively.
yes.
Okay.
So a barrier is just staying in your bubble and not kind of breaking out of that and becoming a friend to someone who's a little different from yourself. Or this is a crazy little data point. The New York Times did a survey. They found that if an American can find North Korea on the map, they don't want to bomb it. They don't want to go to war. So it's one simple data point, and this is where global education that is so vital. So if you can find Iraq or North Korea or Afghanistan on a map, you're less likely to want to go to war. So we're just seeing education has so much power in building peace. And so if we can overcome these barriers, it's actually not as difficult. So I'm very optimistic. I'm very hopeful that we could have peace if we educate our younger generation in the ways of peace and not only in the ways of war.
Wow, that's beautiful. Could you talk to me a little bit about your latest project?
Sure. So I have Global Kids. So I brought a couple of books, Growing Up Global, Raising Children to Be at Home in the World. This is the Global Education Toolkit for elementary learners. I've also contributed to a number of other books.
Is this more of a workbook?
It's a little bit like a workbook. It's a toolkit for teachers to plug in activities, for parent organizations to organize meaningful global experiences at their schools. And it's been so fun to see schools all over the world incorporating these ideas. So Global Kids is a new publication. I worked with the publisher Barefoot Books, which is a lovely publisher of multicultural materials. And the underlying idea behind Global Kids is that every child can be a friend to the whole human race. That's what it means to be a global kid. And that the world, and this is another idea that I grew up with, that to me is a spiritual idea, but it also can be embraced by any age child, that the world is like a garden. And when we realize that the diversity of flowers, fragrances, sizes, shapes makes the garden more beautiful, then I'm not afraid of diversity. And so what we try to do, we have 50 cards, and each card has a different activity in different categories. So this one is from Rwanda. And we wanted to show, everybody I ask, what do you think of when you think of Rwanda? They think of genocide. They think of catastrophe. But we want to tell a different story. So in this case, Rwanda was the first country in the world to ban single-use plastic bags.
Wow.
So our activity is making a penalty pot that if a child's parent, let's say, or teacher used a plastic bag or a straw, they have to pay a penalty. They're going to decorate a jar in this Rwandan art form. And then your child, who's basically a blank slate and can break down those prejudices and then be inspired by Rwanda and not fearful of Rwanda or have a stereotypical idea,
I see.
starts to think differently. Or we really cared about depicting Native American culture in a way that wasn't culturally appropriating. So here we have a Haudenosaunee agricultural practice of making Three Sisters soup, and the Three Sisters are the crops of corn, beans, and squash, and we're learning from companion planting in the recipe of making the soup. And a lot of people don't know that Haudenosaunee is what I grew up knowing as Iroquois, but Iroquois is a French colonial term, and they call themselves Haudenosaunee or Haudenosaunee. And so, like, even grown-ups can learn. Or Iraq. Here's a card about Iraq, and it's countdown. And then this is about the fact that algebra was invented in Iraq. So Iraq is not only a place where we have war, but there's an ancient civilization. So we're learning how to count in Arabic and make numbers with Play-Doh.
We're just learning
just to
all
make
kinds
it fun.
of things today.
We also want to really go deep on empathy in these cards. So here's a card on South Africa that explores the ethic of Ubuntu. And Ubuntu means I am because we are. And it's making basically a poster of all our linkages with the people that make our life happen. And it's inspired by this ethic of South Africa. Or this card is inspired by Israel, and it's making a mitzvah chart. And so a mitzvah is a good deed, and it's helping children recognize that what do you value, and then how do you practice it? So all of these are ways to be a friend to the whole human race. So deepening our empathy and having fun along the way.
That actually does sound really fun. I do have just one more question for you. You briefly mentioned cultural appropriation, and this question always sort of, it's rattles around in my brain. So what is the line between celebrating somebody's culture and appropriating their culture? Where is that line drawn?
That's a great
in your
question.
opinion?
That's a great question. So it's really complex, and what I find is the ground is shifting under our feet all the time. Like, I am learning more about what it means every day. But where I start is, first of all, my culture is not your costume. So start with thinking about, are you turning a culture into a costume? Are you taking it out of context? Is this object that you want to wear or make as a craft, like we have an activity here, we have a number of activities that are, we changed because we were concerned about cultural appropriation, like making a Maasai, the Maasai culture
warrior
from Kenya. We were going to make a collar with a paper plate. And we had even checked it out with various Kenyan friends and experts. And then we realized this is an object that is an honor to wear one of these collars. To make it with a disposable household object is not appropriate. It's made by people who have a certain level of craftsmanship in their community. It's not just any old kid can come and color it in.
Right.
And so there's a really interesting difference between your intention may be good, but the impact may not be good. And so we need to check between our intent and our impact. So is it a sacred object? Are you wearing a culture as a costume? Have you been invited by the people of that culture to wear that costume? Are you approaching it with humility? And are you going to be learning and try to learn in the context? It's all about context. So are you learning in the context of what is sacred and what is important in that culture? And a lot of people push back and they're like, that's politically correct and I don't want to worry about it. But I think I don't like the term being politically correct, because I think we just want to do the right thing.
Right.
And their cultures have been trampled, people have been hurt and oppressed and marginalized for centuries. And we have the opportunity, with all the information available to us now, to do a better job. And so if we want to realize the oneness of humanity, we have to recognize we need to do things differently. And we need to center the voices of the people that we have marginalized and diminished. And so that's one of the reasons why, like, I want to start with kids, because kids will do a better job and they'll have more time to sort of develop empathy muscles, to develop the ability to be more deeply respectful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So this again is Homa Tavangar, and this is Baha'is Today at MLTV Mainline Network. And thank you so much for coming and for speaking.
Thank you so much, Nadia. It was
All
great
right,
to be here.
guys. If you want more information, you can go to www.mainlinebaha'is.org and have a wonderful rest of the day.